nanach, nachma. Meshivas Nevesh Part 3, Lesson 120. For the essence of the Jewish people's holiness is tzitzis and tefillin, which are an aspect of the light of truth. They are an aspect of a bull and a sheep. But sometimes the forces of evil rise up so powerfully that they steal even this aspect of a bull and a sheep, slaughtering or selling them, meaning that they blemish or entirely devoid a person of one's essential holiness, which is tzitzis and tefillin. But one must be determined not to despair of oneself and to draw oneself henceforth to the ultimate truth, seeking and searching to truly return to God. For in the end, what becomes of a person? So one must search and ask and plead from now on for one's ultimate purpose, until God helps one to find the thief and to extract from him many times over an aspect of 4 and 5 times the original value. Furthermore, encouragement can be drawn from the teaching that everyone can draw close to God through the light of truth that shines even in the utter darkness of light, which is an aspect of the evening prayer when tzitzis and tefillin are not worn. Lesson 125. As long as a person strengthens himself in perfect faith, he always has hope. Lesson 126. Although anyone who wants to approach holiness must surround as the mighty staff of one's service. That is the power and merit of one's good points. That is the power and merit of one's good points, especially the power and merit of the true tzaddikim in whom one takes refuge. This is only to subdue the evil in oneself. That is, since the evil inclination comes to confuse a person even concerning the little bit of service that one does do, and to weaken one's confidence by pointing out one's many corruptions and blemishes. One must search oneself to find some good points in order to lift one's spirits and strengthen oneself as in and a little bit longer, and there will be no evildoers before God. Though one should stand like a lowly pauper and pour out one's heart like water in a spirit of begging for mercy and supplication, and now for begging for mercy and supplication, and not depend on one's merits at all, and neither should one be impatient. This is an aspect and not demand on one's merit at all, and neither should one be impatient. This is an aspect of what was said about King David. Adina, the etzni, which our sages explained to mean when he went out to war, he hardened like a tree, and when he studied words of Torah, he became fragile, adin, as a worm. So 127, rebbe nachman expounded profusely about how one cannot hasten developments, even in the case of drawing close to holiness. Rather, one must patiently wait expectantly for God's salvation until one merits expressing oneself properly to God, begging for mercy and with supplication until one merits receiving passionate words as hot as fiery coals. Then one must continue to wait until one's request is fulfilled, and until one draws close to God as is fitting. Nevertheless, while waiting, one must not allow one's attention to stray from yearning and longing for God. Nachman, lesson 120. Every person should know that a hair's breadth is extremely precious. In fact, one's situation is dependent at every moment on a hair's breadth. One can damage a great deal with a hair's breadth, and one can rectify a great deal through a hair's breadth. For God's granting of good outweighs his punishments. Indeed, a hair's breadth of holiness is extremely precious. God in his mercy granted us numerous mitzvahs every day, and each Jew draws himself to the side of good every day. One leaves one's house and business matters to go to synagogue. He dons the talis and tefillin and prays. And there are certainly many good points in all this that are aspects of holy hairs, which are extremely precious to God. The same applies to lust and fantasies that overwhelm a person every day. Anyone who is even slightly upright suffers greatly from this and constantly toils to subdue these thoughts fantasies, and every moment one makes to distance oneself from them as much as a hair's breadth is very, very precious in God's eyes. As the verse says, He knows our evil inclination, and He knows how the evil inclination rises up against each and every person. So every single movement with which one draws oneself from the side of evil to holiness is precious in God's eyes. Man exists in a physical world that is filled with evil forces that cling onto a person very tightly, and if not for God's help, one would fall into their hands. Therefore one must conduct oneself wisely at all times, guarding oneself carefully, that one's thoughts not wander outside the boundaries of holiness, even as much as a hair's breadth straying is little, as a hair's breadth from the path of good can mislead a person into contorted paths, and as everyone knows in one's heart, most of one's sins began with only a hair's breadth of not being careful to guard one's thoughts enough, and as a result one was drawn away bit by bit. As the verse says, woe to those who draw iniquity on themselves with cords of falsehood, sin like the ropes of a wagon. And as our sages said today, the evil inclination tells one to do such and so much, and the next day it leads one away yet further. The overwhelming of the evil inclination would render all hope futile, if not for the fact that God's good is predominant, and a hair's breadth of holiness is extremely precious. Therefore one must know the opposite is also true, and that when the evil inclination rises up powerfully against one, making it seem that one has already strayed so far that one cannot possibly withstand it, one must know and believe that every single movement one makes to distance oneself and pull away from evil, even as little as a hair's breadth, is very precious in God's eyes. Furthermore, these hairs gather over time, and one will merit comprehensions of godliness drawn through holy constrictions, which are aspects of hairs, since they are brought about through an aspect of these hairs, specifically by a Jew drawing himself from evil to good every day, the essence of which is a hair's breadth is said. Even great tzaddikim are constantly dependent upon a hair's breadth, a chut asara, as in those who surround him are very nisara, which the sages interpret to mean judged by a hair's breadth, as in 129. The essence of Judaism is dependent upon strengthening oneself, which is an aspect of holy brazenness. Whoever strengthens oneself at all times, even have as little as a hair's breadth, to that degree one enters the realm of holiness, an aspect of you led with your to your holy abode, and draws closer to the Torah, to prayer, and to truth. Tzaddikim, the more one merits Torah and prayer, the more one then merits greater holy brazenness and strengthening, and so on until one reaches high levels in the service of God by consistently strengthening oneself, being courageous and brazen as a leopard. This includes having holy brazenness regarding one's physical body that is particularly brazen in its cravings, and regarding all sorts of brazen leaders of the generation who are the primary obstacles and seducers and leaders of people astray from the path of ultimate truth. On the other hand, a slight weakness of resolve can cause one to lose confidence, because of which one can become distant from Torah and prayer, and lose one's confidence, and so on. Indeed, many have fallen completely because of this. Regarding this, our sages said, one's evil inclination rises up against one every day, and if not for God's help, the evil inclination's main tactic is to weaken one's resolve with its schemes, and if not for God's daily help in strengthening our hearts with many types of encouragement that the true tzaddikim tavad us through their wondrously awesome and extremely deep teachings and discourses, we would have endured tragedies he would have endured tragedies beyond imagination. Therefore the meuman ladder to ascend from level to level in the service of God is only through self-encouragement and holy brazenness. Lesson 130, nanach, nachma, nachman, meuman. When everyone wants to rise from one level to the next, there must first be a descent. One is then in great danger and embattled, and needs much encouragement until one is able to tear down the barrier wall and the darkness that precedes the light, which is an aspect of the descent that precedes the ascent, transforming the descent into an ascent. This is the work of the tzaddikim and the upright throughout their lives. For every human being endures all this, even someone on a very low level, who has sinned greatly when everyone is aroused with the slightest gesture to draw close to something holy, one that experiences many ascents and descents, according to one's arousal to draw close to God, even one who is in the depths of hell and below. When one is aroused to ascend from there, one must inevitably rise through countless levels, just as on the physical level. There are many steps from the ground floor of a house to the second floor, and from the second to the third floor, and all the more so if one imagines how many levels there must be between heaven and earth, and even more so from heaven and above. So are there certainly many levels within the earth. Imagine all the many pits and tunnels in the bowels of the earth. If one wants to ascend from there, one must inevitably ascend from level to level. Yet when one wants to ascend to a slightly higher level, even though that higher level is still very deep within the earth, the forces of evil spread out against one powerfully at each level. Therefore every individual faces great battles and obstacles. When everyone wants to approach some holy service, sometimes during the intensity of the battle, one stumbles and fails to withstand a test, and one then must start anew. For this reason, one needs great strengthening at each level every day, and at all times to have mercy on oneself and reflect upon one's purpose and destiny. For ultimately, what becomes of a person? What becomes of a person? And no matter what, one is obligated to fight God's battles as best as one can. The effort itself of constantly toiling and struggling to emerge and ascend from one's lowly level is itself very precious in God's eyes if one toils and struggles and prays every day to God to extract him from these places. To extract him from these places into which one has fallen. And certainly one's end will be good, for ultimately everything will be transformed to good, and all the sense will be transformed to greater senses in the descent for the purpose of ascent. Lesson 131. Anyone concerned about one's true ever and eternal life, who is overwhelmed by the forces of evil, an aspect of the chambers of exchange, will redouble one's efforts to draw even closer to God, seeing that the forces of evil want to push one away completely. Yes is an aspect of distancing for the sake of drawing close, ascent for the sake of ascent. This is alluded to in our sage's teaching that Mamre advised Abraham concerning circumcision. Mamre is an aspect of the chambers of exchange, to Muwura, which surged up against Abraham, and that is precisely from where Abraham took counsel to circumcise his heart. Now, lesson 132, when a person wants to enter holiness, the forces of evil, the chambers of exchange, surge up against one intensely, and the closer one is to the gate of holiness, the more they surge up. Many were already at the gate and turned back because they did not realize that they were already at the gate, or because the forces of evil surged up against them so greatly that they found it too difficult to break through. But the truly upright person sits and waits patiently for many days outside the gate of holiness. And even if during this time of hoping and anticipating entering, the passion of the evil inclination overwhelms him, he does not leave but continues to wait at the gate of holiness, refusing to turn back under any circumstances. This is an aspect of he sat at the entrance of the tent, sitting in the sense of tarrying, as our sages said, in the heat of the day, sitting in the sense of tarrying, as our sages said, and the heat of day alludes to the passion of the evil inclination. But even then one refuses to deceive oneself and continues reflecting upon one's ultimate purpose, never turning back under any circumstances, only sitting and waiting at the gate of holiness. for many days, as long as is necessary, and though one is not allowed to enter the gate, and the heat of the day, the evil inclination burns inside one intensely. Nevertheless, one does not leave one's place and continues to wait at the gate of the tent of the tzaddikim and the Yabal upright until one is granted mercy from heaven. This is also an aspect of Joshua, who never left the tent. Lesson 133. Amelioration of all constrictions and harsh judgments is mainly through the intellect, and each individual constriction has an intellect of its own that ameliorates that particular constriction. There is also a collective intellect, an aspect of upper wisdom that ameliorates all constrictions and judgments, but it is only possible to receive from there through an abundance of holy books of the Torah. This is an aspect of the bond between man and woman, who represents intellect and constriction, being sealed mainly through a written document, a kesubah. Similarly, divorce between a couple is executed through a bill of divorce. A get for neither marriage or divorce is possible until one ascends to an aspect of the collective intellect from where one is able to receive through an aspect of a book. This is the reason why couples quarrel until they come to a rabbi to arrange a bill of divorce for them, but precisely then they often become reconciled with each other and the love and bond between them becomes strengthened. This is because an illumination is drawn upon them from the amelioration of the collective intellect, where all harsh judgments and conflicts are sweetened. However, since the couple is usually unable to receive the amelioration in its perfect state, the divorce is usually carried through, for they do not have the power to fully ameliorate the conflict between them. In fact, they rise there in order to annul their bond at its root, which is an aspect of the get. But God desires kindness and has already chosen us from among all the peoples when we stood at Mount Sinai, which is called the day of his wedding, as our sages understood the verse. On the day of his wedding, as referring to the giving of the Torah, God has already sworn to our forefathers and to us that he would never reject us. So even when God sometimes uses the language of rejection and distancing, his intention is only to draw us closer, as our sages gave a parable of a king who was angry with his wife and sent for a scribe to write a bill of divorce. In the meantime, he reconciled with her and said to the scribe, go and double her kesubah. This means, as said, that the distancing and separation to annul the original bond is only possible by ascending to an aspect of upper wisdom, an aspect of the collective intellect. But since God is filled with mercy, as soon as we ascend there, his mercies are roused and the tables are turned, and not only is the bond not annulled, but God grants a great illumination to cancel all the constrictions and harsh judgments. Furthermore, all the anger and strictness God has dealt toward the Jewish people throughout history on both the collective and individual levels is all ameliorated and annulled through an aspect of the upper wisdom that was originally roused to draw down illumination for the sake of the separation and bill of divorce. But then things are reversed until instead of great amelioration is drawn from there, which is an aspect of what the king said to the scribe, go and double her kesubah. Instead a great amelioration is drawn from there, which is an aspect of what the king said to the scribe, go and double her kesubah, meaning that a great illumination is drawn from there to strengthen the bond and love and peace. Nanach, this is an aspect of distancing for the sake of drawing close, for God's entire intention in calling the scribe in the parable to write a bill of divorce and speak about distancing us is all with an intention for great good, for the sake of drawing us closer. This is an aspect of, instead of saying to them, you are not my people, it will be said to them, children of the living God, instead of rejection, an aspect of the get that he wanted to write, of the drawing down of illumination from the collective wisdom in order to separate and reject, will occur a transformation and an amelioration of everything will be drawn down until it will be said To them you are children of the living God, for specifically from there is drawn all the amelioration in the world. Lesson 134, in the intensity of exile, in the depth of the descent to the realm of impurity, the Jewish soul cannot receive vitality from any particular aspect of holiness other than from the very lofty holiness that can be concealed and hidden even in completely impure places, reviving those who fell there, as in I will pass through the land of Egypt. And our sages comment, I am not an angel, therefore our descent is indeed sometimes for the purpose of ascent, for sense specifically. In the descent and exile, one receives from a very high holiness. So indeed there is absolutely no reason in the world for despair, since one can return to God from all the evil and impure places in the world. Furthermore, specifically there, a very high holiness is cloaked and hidden. So if a person will remember this during the intensity of his descent and fall, believing with perfect faith that precisely there God himself is hidden, to receive him and hint to him from afar, to return to him simply by refraining from evil, then one can certainly merit drawing close to God from any place one is, and transform the descent into an ascent. That is, one will merit complete repentance, an aspect of Yom Kippur, at which time we ascend to that place, to an aspect of that supernal holiness and ultimate descent through complete repentance. Through complete repentance, one is fitting to ascend there and to receive from there great wealth and abundant good for the Jewish people, and to ameliorate all constrictions and judgments until all sins are transformed to merits. Be strong, and may we be strengthened. Blessed is he who gives strength to the weary. Be strong, and may we be strengthened. Blessed is he who gives strength to the weary, and to the weak ones, increases power, completed with praise to God, creator of the world. Nanach, nachma, meuman. Nachman, meuman. Well, and renowned is the awesomely wondrous holiness of a master teacher and rebbe, the light of lights of nachman, who may his righteous and holy memory be a blessing. Only nanach, nachman, whoever wants to return to God must be very skilled in following a path, so that nothing ever knocks him down or distances him, whether in times of progress or in times of regress. Nanach, nachman, nachman, meuman. Nach, nachman, meuman. Nach, nachman, meuman. Nach, nachman. Whoever desires life, whoever truly wants to have mercy on his own soul, whoever wants to attain the service of prayer, one's primary source of vitality, as the verse is a prayer to the God of my life, which one sustains all worlds. Nach, nachman, meuman. Nach, nachman. Nachman, nachman. Rabbi Elazar said, prayer is greater than good deeds, for there is no good deed greater. Nachman, meuman. Nachman, meuman. Whoever desires to merit repenting should accustom himself to reciting psalms, for reciting psalms is conducive of repentance. Nachman, meuman. Nachman, meuman.